All right, we got our second review lab here. This is talking about a mid-sagittal section of the brain. Now, I know that for the images that you have in your book, you've got actually the opposite image of this one. In your book, you have the right half of the brain. What I have is the left half of the brain. They're identical in the structures that you're going to see. So you just have to just kind of use your Muppet Baby imagination for a moment. What we can see right offhand is we can see all of the cerebrum, which is here, because remember we're looking at a mid-sagittal section, so that's basically looking at equal left and right share here. Also, we can see the structure known as the Corpus Callosum. The Corpus Callosum is a bridge that essentially connects the left and right hemispheres together. There's some debate about the Corpus Callosum and its function in men and women, and how it's more integrated, more connected in women than it is in men. Also, we look closely here, we have this little white structure right here. That structure is known as the Fornix, which is another structure of connection. Once you get below that, you come into the area of the Diencephalon. Now, don't be fooled. The Diencephalon in your image points to this little football-shaped area, but the Diencephalon is broken down into the thalamus and the hypothalamus. The thalamus, also in your book, it has an arrow that points to the thalamus right here. That is not all of the thalamus. This is nothing more than the very middle of the thalamus. Your thalamus, if you could look behind this structure, your thalamus is actually taking up this entire area. It goes a lot deeper than this. So there's a huge area on the other side of these pieces on this model that is the left thalamus, and then there's another piece that cannot be seen on this picture, on this model, that is the right thalamus. Yes, this is part of the thalamus. No, this is not all there is to the thalamus. The thalamus is a lot larger than this. What we're looking at is we're looking at something that's actually been split in half, and we're looking at the very middle of it, which makes the thalamus look very small. You'll also notice that there's a little button here. That button is known as the intermediate mass. The intermediate mass is actually a bridge that connects the left side of your thalamus to the right side of your thalamus. If you look closely here, you'll see this little structure there. It looks like a bird with a little beak. Can you see that? This little structure right here, all of this area along with the little beak, that is known as your hypothalamus. Remember, hypo means below, thalamus, hypothalamus, below the thalamus. So that's the hypothalamus. Here, this white structure is known as the optic chiasma. The optic chiasma is a structure that allows your two optic nerves to connect and cross. What happens is you can see the optic nerve here, and that optic nerve from your left eye and the optic nerve from your right eye actually cross over one another at the optic chiasma, so that what you see with your right eye is being processed on the left side of your brain, and what you see in your left eye is being processed on the right side of your brain. This pink structure here is known as the pineal gland. Remember that the pineal gland produces melatonin. Melatonin helps with our sleep and wake cycles. A higher concentration of melatonin causes you to feel drowsy and feel sleepy, while less melatonin does the opposite. As we go further down, we can see the cerebellum, and this weird white substance that we see spread throughout the cerebellum happens to be the arbor vitae. If you look at it closely, arbor means tree, vitae means life, so it looks like a giant tree. These are actually neural tracts that are responsible for receiving and sending signals from your cerebellum and to your cerebellum so that it can process information concerning balance and coordination of motor skills and motor movements, which brings us over here to the brain stem. This entire thing is the brain stem, but of course our brain stem is split off into three separate structures. There's the mesencephalon, or the midbrain, which is this entire area. There's the pons, and there's the medulla oblongata. Now, the mesencephalon also has another name. It's also known as the midbrain. And yes, it is this and this put together, which is the mesencephalon, or the midbrain. The reason why it looks so awkward in this model is because it's kind of like taking a bundt cake and splitting the bundt cake in half and then looking at it from the side. If you split a bundt cake in half and looked at it from the side, it looked kind of weird because you'd be looking at a C, something shaped like the letter C from the side, and that's what you're looking at here with this particular model. This entire structure here, the back portion of this area, is actually known as your corpora quadrigemina. That's the corpora quadrigemina. And the corpora quadrigemina has two portions to it. It has an upper portion known as the superior colliculi and the inferior colliculi. So the superior colliculi is where you see that number 8. The inferior colliculi is where you see the number 12. Put 8 and 12 together, that entire area is the corpora quadrigemina. And the midbrain is all of this. Just underneath the flap here of the midbrain, you see a strange little white structure known as a mamillary body. And the mamillary body is actually responsible for helping with eating reflexes, such as chewing and movements of the tongue. We move further down, we get the pons. The word pons actually means round, and you can kind of see the round shape of the pons. The pons is kind of like the thalamus in a way, if you kind of think about it. The thalamus deals with relaying sensory information, while the pons deals a lot with relaying motor information. Now, that's not the only thing that the pons does, but it does deal with relaying a lot of motor information, especially motor information that's coming from the cerebellum. It's that information that has to come out of the cerebellum through the pons and then up to the brain or out through spinal nerves or down the rest of the brain stem, which leads us to the last part of the brain that we're talking about, which is the medulla oblongata. The medulla oblongata probably didn't matter to anybody until the infamous movie The Waterboy, starring Adam Sandler. And the medulla oblongata is responsible for things like regulating cardiovascular functions and respiratory functions. Also, a couple of other things I just remembered. These little grooves that you see here in the surface of your cerebellum, these are known as the vermis. And lastly, you can barely see it in there, but do you see that dark blue that's just behind the pink? If you can see the dark blue that's just behind the pink, that dark blue is known as your choroid plexus. Now, plexus means network, and that happens to be a network of highly sophisticated capillaries, little, really small blood vessels that are responsible for getting things in and out of the blood flow. So the choroid plexus is a very important network of very small blood capillaries that actually allow you to be able to exchange substances with your cerebrospinal fluid that's passing through your brain. It also helps with recycling old cerebrospinal fluid.